President Trump is making it clear he strongly disagrees with the flood of U.S. allies calling for Palestinian statehood, reinforcing that today at the UN General Assembly.
The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire.
Here with me, Andrea Mitchell, NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent, and Hagar Chemali, former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the UN. What an honor to be here with both of you who know so much and have followed this all the way. So, Andrea, as you know, we saw France, Australia, Canada, UK, among others, calling for Palestinian statehood. But with Donald Trump on the other side, where does that leave things?
And with Israel on the other side, and what Israel is doing in Gaza and really expanding its settlements in the West Bank, so going in both directions. Look, it's symbolic, but it does isolate the U.S. and Israel diplomatically and politically. It's a significant step. And it's a significant step not because everyone isn't acknowledging that there won't be a Palestinian state unless there is, first of all, a ceasefire, then a peace agreement with security for Israel, with acknowledged security, which a consortium of Arab countries were going to provide, and with territory. And there has to be contiguous territory. And what the Israelis have done recently is approved, although they haven't moved on it, a very controversial tract of land between the north and south of the West Bank, which would cut off any possibility of a Palestinian state. It would take the whole central part of the West Bank. It's called E1, technically, and it just basically would, make it impossible to ever have a complete nation. So the Arab countries have said that that annexation and that occupation is a red line. The UAE has said that they will never normalize relations, recognize Israel, if that is done, and that would mean no future for the Abraham Accords. So that is one thing that's on the table. But the other thing is, peace in Gaza. And even the IDF leaders, their own military generals, said it's time to end the war. But the very conservative two coalition members, are insisting on proceeding. And so that is what Netanyahu, who comes here Friday, is committed to, and so is Donald Trump.
The UN Secretary General Hagar said that the only way out of what he called this nightmare between Israel and Gaza is a two-state solution. Here's exactly what he said.
What is the alternative? A one-state scenario where Palestinians are denied basic rights? This is neither peace nor justice. It will only increase the growing isolation of Israel on the global stage. And let's be clear, statehood for the Palestinians is a right, not a reward. And denying statehood would be a gift to extremists everywhere.
So again, where does this leave things?
Yeah, it's, the truth is that it's not that he's necessarily wrong about everything he said. I'm not sure I love the whole right and reward thing. That's not how state building works, or nation building. But the fact is that he's not addressing, there's an elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is that they're in the middle of a war. States, when they're created, if you look at states like Kosovo or South Sudan, they were created at the end of a conflict. They were part of not just a negotiated agreement, but because there's a lot more that goes into a state than just recognizing it or declaring it, which is why, Andrea, you mentioned, right, this is symbolic. It does have effects, of course, but what state? What are the borders of that state? What are the capital of that state? If you have Palestinians there, are they going back? Are you going to facilitate that? Are you paying reparations if you're the UK, for example? I mean, it's very complicated, and it becomes as simple. But to do it also without conditions, there's still a pay-to-slay policy. That's put in place by the Palestinian Authority. Why wouldn't you say, if you're Macron, get rid of your pay-to-slay policy, and I will recognize a state? It just gave up this leverage. But the fact is, again, most foreign policy establishment people like me believe that the only solution is two states. And I believe that deeply, and I'm worried about anything that gets in the way of that. And I don't want to sound like I'm pro status quo, but doing it this way doesn't move the needle in any way, shape, or form.
Just to point out, and you're absolutely right, Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister at the Council on Foreign Relations yesterday, said, obviously there have to be conditions that are met. And those conditions, as Secretary Blinken said, on 13 missions, shuttle missions to the region over 2 years, which did not result, in an agreement that was then, carried out by Hamas and not even by the administration, the new administration. But they all said that there have to be conditions, including reform. And implicit in that was removing Mahmoud Abbas, the, elderly and ineffective and arguably, critically, corrupt Palestinian Authority leader for all these years, bringing in Palestinian reformers. There is a whole cadre of younger, we know them,
Many of them.
You know some of them here academically, young reformers who have been involved and could be elected, but Abbas has resisted that. But of course, Rubio also took an unprecedented step, and we saw Khrushchev, Gaddafi, other leaders speaking at great length also, adversaries speaking at the UN. He's denied the visas, so Abbas had to deliver this speech for the first time virtually because he and his delegation couldn't come. They weren't visaed, and that was a very aggressive, hot, action.
There was another part of the president's speech that you really couldn't ignore, besides the fact that he criticized almost everyone in the audience. He particularly went after the United Nations. He said they're not living up to their potential. They write letters and they do nothing. I was talking in the last hour to Ned Price, former State Department, and it's not new to go after the United Nations or to criticize what their effectiveness is. But does that just roll off the shoulders of all the people in the audience who are listening? Or does it land in a way that makes them even further reassess how they move forward on any of these issues without the United States?
Sure. Well, so on one hand, by the way, I agree with that point. I might not have delivered it as harshly, but having worked at the UN for 2 decades, I would say the UN is not living up to its mission. And most people would say that, whether they're to the left or the right. Most nations say that, too. I mean, it's very clear. And he reinforced that point by when he's touting his accomplishments, that he says, right, like, I've come to these 7 peace deals. And we can dive into them, some of them.
And most people say I should be getting the Nobel Peace Prize for all of them.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And some of them were significant. Some of them maybe less so, or some of them were in train already. But that said, he's trying to reinforce this point of, I got these deals unilaterally. And at the same time, I'm here at the UN at a time of a financial crisis, in large part because the U.S. is withholding funding. And you all are it's not useful. And sometimes the U.S. tries to use the UN as a vehicle for its foreign policy or national security objectives. But as a result, it's not that the UN is not needed. I'm a big believer that the UN is needed, as much as I really do criticize it, as it needs to be burnt to the ground and rebuilt. But that said, other nations are going to hear that and feel, okay, we need to rejigger, we need to reevaluate, and they are. So the UN is already cutting offices and cutting staff, which is fine, but actually it needs a new strategy on this part.
But just very quickly, they're cutting off the best parts of the UN, the U.S. is, in the World Food Program, World Health Organization, the refugee program, UNRWA. So they're
with
taking
proven effectiveness.
They're taking the elements that
UNRWA,
are
I don't know about this one, but
okay, but the refugee, well.
Oh yeah, UNHCR.
UNHCR.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
I agree. The ones in the field are the
ones in the
best
field
work.
are doing really
Yes,
work,
all
and
of them,
they've good work, and they have done very good visa, interviews and all of that. That said, you can't cut off the money and criticize the UN at the same time, and then cloak your speech in, well, a lot of things like, I should have had the contract to build the building, and you don't have real marble, and he diminishes his effectiveness with those extraneous comments, I'm just going to say.
Andrea Mitchell, Hagar Shamali, thank you. It has been a month this Tuesday. It's so good, and they're so happy to be together. They came in, they were excited to actually see each other face to face and to see you all face to face. Thank you for being here.